From the land to Grant University in Urbana-Champaign, Illinois, this is the Closing Market Report. It is the 15th day of August 2025. I'm Extension's Todd Gleason. Coming up, we'll talk with Mike Zuzolo, globalcomresearch.com, about the commodity markets and today's trade. Mike will also join us, if you can stay with us for the whole hour on our home station, you'll hear this, for our Commodity Week program. Our other panelists for that were Naomi Bloom of Total Farm Marketing and Greg Johnson of Total Grain Marketing. In the Closing Market Report, we'll also talk today with Eric Snodgrass of Nutrien Ag Solutions about the weather forecast, and we'll get a quick update of some things that have been happening in Washington, D.C. on this Friday edition of the Illinois Public Media Ag Programming. Find it online at willag.org, where it is public radio for the farming world.
Todd Gleason services are made available to WILL by University of Illinois Extension.
September corn for the day settled at 383 3/4, up 8 3/4 cents. December at 405 1/4, 8 higher. And the March at 422 1/2, up 8.5 cents. September beans 14 3/4 higher, finished at 1022 1/4. November at 1042 1/2, up 14 cents. Bean meal futures 90 cents lower. The bean oil up $1.19. Soft red winter wheat 2.5 cents higher at $5.27. The hard red at $5.28 1/2, up 2.5 as well. And live cattle futures were up $3.82 1/2. Mike Zuzolo, globalcomresearch.com from Atchison, Kansas, now joins us. Thank you, Mike. It is great to talk with you again. This is the third time this week, and despite them being on Tuesday, Thursday, and today, Friday, things have been different each day. That's not always the case in the marketplace, and I certainly did not expect it to be different after the USDA report on Tuesday. I was hopeful, but I'm surprised, actually.
Yeah, that huge sense of deja vu with last year in August. You know, it started at the end of July when we didn't get any kind of commodity demand low, grain demand low led by the corn, like I was hoping we would, because USDA did cut those ending stocks for the 24-25 substantially again, Todd. And we're very, very thin on supplies right now heading into harvest, which that will begin in the South very soon. But yeah, the issue with the second half of August now having passed is even a greater sense of deja vu in the aftermath of the WASDE report, because in part, while we were able to get up to closing positive for the week in the corn, led by the soybeans and led by the weather, that again just smells so strongly of last year at this time. And, you know, thankfully, we've got some real technical support underneath us now as we head into the end of the month, as we head into a lot of private crop tours and numbers that are going to be tossed around the next couple of weeks. And so the lows from last year, 360 1/2 in lead month corn, made on the week of the 26th of August, 936 1/4 in soybeans, made this same week last year in August. And then the soft red wheat of 493 1/2, also made on the 26th week of August of last year. These are the three numbers that I think are substantially more important than they were a week ago and before the report. And especially, I would say that soft red wheat price, because we got within 6-7 cents of that level as we trimmed, you know, price action and sank right heading into the WASDE numbers.
Next week, the Pro Farmer Crop Tour will be out. We cover it intentionally because I like to know what's in the field. It oftentimes does not have much of an impact on the marketplace, and I understand why that's the case. Next week seems like it could be different. It would either substantiate what USDA has said, in which case the marketplace is currently trading at, to the best of my knowledge, or at least it feels like it still is, or it would give us a look at a big crop getting smaller, and that would be a whole different sort of feel to the market.
Yeah, I agree with you. I would say this. I think that maybe in the soybeans, as we closed out Friday, the fact that we got back towards that 3-week high that we made before August futures expired of 1025 1/2, very, very close, right up against the 26-week moving average in lead month soybeans. We were able to get within 3 or 4 cents of that, I think it was, on Friday. That suggested to me, being back to 1025 in the front end would suggest to me with the world supplies that the trade is trimming the USDA yield right now, that 53.6 yield, I think it was. They're trimming that, I think, as we closed out Friday's trade. But in the corn, I wholeheartedly agree that the trade is very leery about trimming. The nicest thing to me, other than the technicals that we talked about this week for corn, was the fact that we saw the spreads come around the September, March, the September, July. It seemed as though we tried to make a low in those spreads. That's going to be really important as we get this crop data, because I would think that if you continue to hear crop data out of corn tours that suggest a much lower corn yield, you'd bring the premium back into the front end and take it out of the back end and reduce that carrying charge. So I think that's a really important element to next week's trade.
Okay, so I know you had been a seller of soybeans into the marketplace. Are you scale up selling still as we try to move corn through a higher move, if that's possible?
Yes, that is. I would say the November beans, if you're a technician and you think about the weather staying hot and dry fundamentally another 2 weeks, because it's so critical of a time period, that it looks like there might be what would be called a bull flag in the market, with 2 sharp days higher, one late last week and one this week on Monday. And then you've got 3 pretty much consolidation days following those 2 sharp moves higher. That I would call a bullish flag that could project up to that June high of 1074.25 in November. Those would be the areas that I'd be looking at to get caught up and do some more bean hedges. And then hopefully, with the way that bean corn ratio is so stretched that whatever beans go up, the corn tries to go up almost the same amount. If we could get 25, 30 cents out of the December corn here and move it back up towards that 440, 450 level, that would be really, really nice to get some off the combine sales done.
All right, that would be fantastic. You just made the day of a lot of producers who are hopeful that that might be the case, but we never know. So what else are you watching? Anything in the cattle market that we need to be aware of, or other things that you have been thinking about? You're always looking at wheat as well.
Yeah, we had in the cattle, we should mention the screwworm press conference by Governor Abbott and Secretary of Agriculture Rollins. It was no change. The most important point that I pulled out of it and watched the whole thing was our ports are not opening until screwworm is pushed back to the Darien Gap in Central America. And it's going to take some time to do that as we build new facilities and we bring on new cooperation and real-time tracking and some other things that they announced. Are putting a lot of money behind this. Obviously, it's important. And so the cattle were able to go higher, make new daily highs. We still have not taken out the record highs in August front-end cattle, August front-end feeders from August 7th. Those are important numbers next week as well, because you want this momentum to continue, especially with the cash market coming around. The only other thing I'd mention is the U.S.-Russia summit. The dollar and the crude oil, I suspect, are going to be talked about a lot next week, depending on how this meeting goes.
Speaking of talking, thank you so much for being with me on Tuesday, yesterday for Commodity Week, which if folks stick around, they will hear at least a portion of it, all of it on our home station coming up shortly, and then again today, as usual, on a Friday. I really appreciate it.
Well, Todd, I appreciate you and Will Radio. You helped build my business, and that's something you'll never see me forget.
That, of course, is you helped build our listenership here, too. Thank you. Mike Zuzolo, of course, is with GlobalComResearch.com out of Atchison, Kansas. Up next, Democrats have been ramping up their criticism of USDA's reorganizational plan. Some in the GOP are also unhappy. 23 House Ag Democrats wrote Secretary Rollins saying they were not consulted on the reorganization to create 5 regional hubs and service to farmers will suffer. Top Senate Ag Democrat Amy Klobuchar claimed at a hearing last month that a 2019 move to Kansas City, Missouri in the first Trump term was a disaster.
GAO explicitly stated, based on this much smaller relocation, that ERS produced fewer key reports and that NIFA, known as NIFA, took longer to process grants.
But Deputy USDA Secretary Stephen Vaden was ready for that attack.
From January 2021 to January 2025, the Biden administration, 2,200 employees left Washington, D.C. There was no congressional notice. There was no outcry. There was no committee hearing.
And while that's all true, it's not really the same, as those employees moved out not because they were let go.
For more than 1,700 days, extending well beyond any fair definition of the COVID pandemic, USDA was on a maximum telework footing.
Again, there is a difference between being relocated and or fired and working out of your home. Still, some Republicans looked at this and were not pleased because USDA simply didn't consult them this time on the new hub plan first, which is an actual reorganization of USDA, said Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley.
Now, maybe they wouldn't have picked Des Moines, Iowa, but I'd like to know why Kansas City was picked over Des Moines, Iowa.
Grassley says Vaden finally agreed to consult lawmakers, but after the fact, giving members less sway in final decisions, and adding that Chair Boozman has called for a Senate hearing over the same concerns. You're listening to the Closing Market Report from Illinois Public Media, celebrating 40 years on the air, more than 10,000 episodes and 30,000 interviews. Our theme music, by the way, is written, performed, produced, and courtesy of Logan County, Illinois farmer Tim Gleason. On this Friday, let's check in with Eric Snodgrass at Nutrient Solutions and Agrable. Thanks, Eric, for being with us. The month of August has been running warm, depending on where you are. Mm-hmm. Can you take a quick look back at the first 15 days since we're halfway through the month now?
Yeah, it has been warm and it's been dry. Now, the first 4 days of August were nice and cool. Remember those? This was an amazing start to the month.
Oh, yeah.
And then about the time you had to go to the fair, we've just cranked the thermostat up and it's still quite high. And especially going into the weekend, we're going to get temps deep into the 90s, which is interesting. And we were kind of chatting about this offline, but, it's watching the corn crop respond to the heat and drier conditions as of late. It's been a pretty rapid transition here at the end of this growing season. Now, drier overall for much of the country in August so far. And we do have rains, but they're not coming really here. It's going to be more of the upper Midwest, again, Minnesota, Wisconsin, grabbing more of the precipitation than us. That doesn't mean we won't get any, but I'm just saying patterns more suited to bring some moisture there. But, we saw the drought monitor expand in the Mid-South after what had been about 15 days of drier weather down there. And it continues to be quite expansive in the Western United States as well. But, this would have been much more important news if we were talking about it 40 days ago. But instead, here we are at the end of August, and it's kind of a moot point given all the other massive estimates we've seen on this crop.
What do you see for the next 15 days?
So the heat doesn't stick around for too long. We get a break of it by mid next week, and then whatever's left, a warm-up that comes back seems to want to get punched again by another blast of some cooler air that's going to just anchor around the Great Lakes into the Northeast. So any heat we have is still coming in these waves like the one we were in right now. So it's not like, we have those summers where it just pours on and never lets up. And about the only thing that hasn't fully let up this summer has been the warmer overnight lows. I mean, it was 78 this morning in St. Louis. And so we do have questions about the Eastern Corn Belt and how good the crop could be. Is it as good, or is this potential as high as the Western Corn Belt? That's a question that needs answered, Todd. And I don't know that I have it yet. I think we're going to see yield checks revealing it, but it's overall drier, but not dry going through the next 15 days.
Okay, and the thing I always think about at the end of the season is the bowling alley, or at least what I call the bowling alley on the western tip of Africa opening up, and hurricanes are rolling down the alley towards the United States and where they turn, and how they make it into the U.S. and what that actually means. So what kind of hurricane options do we have coming up at the end of the month, or now for that matter?
Yeah, I mean, the nation, as it concerns with weather, doesn't really care about the Corn Belt today. They're thinking a lot more about what's going on with Hurricane Aaron. Aaron over the weekend will likely jump up to at least Cat 3, probably Cat 4 by early next week. And the scary part about Aaron is that where it currently sits and where it was born reminds a whole lot of folks of Hurricane Florence. And that was 2018. Now get this. Florence in 2018 came into North Carolina and dropped 57 inches of rain in 3 days. So yeah, you have a right to be worried about Aaron, but right now, as of Friday, almost every ounce of evidence that I have for Aaron suggests that it stays out in open ocean, maybe grazing the East Coast, but more likely hitting Bermuda. Now, if that changes, you're going to hear every single meteorologist out there ringing a pretty loud bell next week. But there is only one other piece to it, and that is a little disturbance in the Gulf, but it's going to go over the Rio Grande. It's not going to go over Texas and come up our way. So in the near term, not a lot of support from the tropics dumping moisture. I think these beans need one more kick of rain. We're not going to get it from a hurricane anytime soon. But I wouldn't rule out a more active second half of the season after we get into early September. Remember, the peak is around September 15th.
Yeah, I like a Labor Day weekend rainfall on soybeans just to get them done and really put the grain on them. So we'll see how that goes. Speaking of September and fall, what have you been thinking?
All right, so since 2020, we've had 4 La Nina falls and 1 El Nino fall, okay? And the El Nino fall was 2023. So the 2 surrounding it, 22 and 24, remember, were bone dry. I mean, last year was the worst. So we have another weak La Nina sitting there, and there's a lot of question. Do we have a dry fall coming up? And a lot of folks like, fine, bring on a dry fall. I get my harvest done quickly. Just don't make it as dry as last year. We didn't get any meaningful rain last year until we got into November. So historical precedents would tell me to tell you, hey, there's a good chance we have a little bit drier than average fall, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But if that La Nina kicks it up a notch and keeps going into winter, it could really set us up for a more active winter, as we typically say, through the Ohio Valley, but a lot of that's unknown. I think the bigger question, Todd, will be if that same effect from a La Nina that typically happens in North America also happens in South America. And that would be by the time we get into October, do the rains come on time or even early to let them get established quickly? And I'm curious, Todd, have you heard, are they going to get to plant on September 1 again this year in certain states in Brazil?
I was with a series of Paraguayan farmers who farm in Brazil last night, and I did not ask, mostly because of the language barrier. So I tried to ask, but it just didn't happen. So I have not heard. I don't know whether they get to go Sep 1 or Sep 15 at the moment. Yeah. I will find out soon enough, though.
That's for sure. And I think that date's going to be important, especially if the rains come in.
All right. Hey, thanks much. We'll talk to you again soon.
All right. Sounds good.
Eric Snodgrass is with Nutrient Ag Solutions, and Daggerable joined us on this Friday edition of the Closing Market Report that came to you from Illinois Public Media, online on demand at willag.org. That's willag.org. Don't forget the Illinois State Fair runs through Sunday, and that next week the Pro Farmer Crop Tour kicks off. We'll be checking in on it each day of the week to see how things are going both on the eastern and the western legs. And then the following week is Farm Progress Show in Decatur. Put that one on your must-do list. Visit the Farm Progress Show Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, the last full week of August in Decatur. I'll give you more details as we get closer to the time.